So my name is Fred Wheeler. Hi. And today, basically, I am going to go through the Lost Mine of Phandelver. This is like a Dungeon Master guide and tutorial. I run the HowtoDandD YouTube channel. I have for quite a while, about 6 years. And I have done a lot of video content on this. So I actually have quite a lot of experience. I would say right now that the vast majority of the stuff that I do is around helping people and trying to demonstrate stuff and explain stuff. And so what I thought would be useful to you is to go through some of the basics in terms of how to do this and hopefully be successful and do it your way, okay? This is not necessarily an absolute with anything. The intention for today is to get you to introduce the player characters. We're going to go through that process, introducing Gundren rockseeker, which is often something that is missed, often because there isn't a lot of information on Gundren rockseeker. The adventure hook will deal with that, escorting the wagon supplies and dealing with the goblin ambush and finding the goblin trail. All of this material is always going to be designed in terms of explaining first with some demonstration, or at least after the explanation, and then allowing a playthrough or practice. Maybe not with everybody, but with somebody, okay? Certainly when it is possible to do so. The main thing for me is I am going to concentrate on giving you the basics in terms of what you need. So when it comes to starting off your pre-game check, the things that you want to try and do before you even start, and I would suggest to you the easiest way to deal with this is do a session 0. You don't have to do the session 0 and use up all the time on session 0. That's not necessary at all. What you can do, though, is you can use that to build the characters. Building the characters together is probably one of the smartest things you can do. Even if you're not building your characters together, one of the things you do want to do and make sure that you do it is that you really want to ensure that you have a discussion about what is expected in your campaign. Even if you're using the pre-made campaign characters, for this demonstration, will be using the pre-made characters, because if you have any trouble or get stuck or don't know what to do, then I can easily find that information because I have those character sheets beside me and I can check on that information for you. Whereas if I had to try and do that with any kind of thing that you've created yourself, it would be more difficult because I wouldn't have those character sheets. So that's why I'm doing it in such a way where I'm going to use the pre-made characters rather than have you build your own characters for the session. Now, that might be completely different for your group. Your group may decide they really want to build their own characters, and certainly allow them to do so. I would advise them on some sort of guidance around that. We'll discuss that. All of the player characters have their character sheets. Make sure they have their character sheets, their dice, their pencil, their eraser. If you're playing in person, if you're playing digitally, there'll be other things you require. Your maps, your pens, your pencils. If you're using miniatures or maps, then certainly have those ready. Grab those books, or at least the starter set, the rule book and the adventure itself. And then you want to note down a couple of things. It's called passive perception. You want to note down the passive perception of all of the player characters when you're running the adventure. And you want to try to do that ahead of time if possible. Okay, so what I've done here, just to give you a quick idea of what's going on. If I think I've got it up. Is it the right way up? Yep, it is. Okay, so this is the passive perception for all of the characters that I have selected for today. And we've got the wizard is a 13, rogue is a 10, cleric is 13, fighter is 13. Kind of strange the rogue is quite low, but now where do you find this? This is actually found on this pre-made character sheet, and it's right here, okay? It's underneath all of the skills, and it says passive perception, and it's got wisdom, okay? That's the number you're looking for. Now, what is passive perception? It's 10 plus your perception modifier, which is found along here. And perception is usually the wisdom modifier, for those of you who are wondering. Make sure you have that ready, particularly when you're dealing with them in exploring or any kind of combat. So a useful thing to have. The next aspect of this is I am going to give you a couple of exercises in terms of like introducing the player characters. So there's a reason why I've selected a map here, and you don't have to use a map. okay? I've selected a map here that is of a tavern. And the idea behind this is I have selected the 4 characters that are going to be introduced. They're going to introduce themselves. I would suggest that you, as the Dungeon Master, introduce Gundren Rockseeker. So role-playing Gundren Rockseeker might seem like a difficult thing to do, but there's almost no detail in the adventure or very little information. You might find a little bit on page 6 of the adventure, but there is a video on YouTube on my channel that does actually go into quite a lot of detail about Gundren Rockseeker. And I would suggest grabbing yourself like a picture or an image. I found it really useful to have a picture or an image, ultimately because it helps the players get to grips with what's going on. Now, where's my, that map? Where is this? That way? This way? Which way? That way? Let me go this way. Keep going. Come on. It is not going to let me do that. So I did have a picture for you, but it looks like it won't cycle through, and I don't understand why. So that is super helpful. Technical difficulties. Okay, so let's see if I can just open up a new tab, and okay, there's Gundren, and then we can then go in here and share you. Now, I think you'll find this image is pretty easy to find on the internet, Gundren Rockseeker, okay? It's up to you what sort of picture you would like to use, but I would show them a picture at least to give them an idea of what's going on, okay, just to start off with. The next thing I would say is you probably want to deal with asking the players, or having each player explain why they are friends with Gundren Rockseeker. It's actually really important that you do this, and ultimately because if you don't get your characters to actually explain why they're friends with Gundren Rockseeker, the only reason they're doing this adventure is for money, and that is one of the weakest and poorest ways of doing anything. So I would suggest, now, how do we do that? Like, what's the deal? If we have to give the players an explanation, get them to explain why they're friends with Gundren Rockseeker, what happens if they just don't have any idea? Now, I have 10 ideas for you, which I'm going to go over. So if you're curious as to what you might be able to suggest, I'm going to suggest first the player character could, if they are playing a dwarf, have them related to Gundren Rockseeker. That's one way of doing it. Easy peasy. The player character could be have survived a mining collapse with Gundren. If they worked a mine in the past. The Rockseeker brothers might have helped them fight off an orc raid on their village. That's another connection that you can have with the Gundrens, the Gundren Rockseekers. Gundren is like a tavern drinking and singing buddy. Like, they hang out together. That's what they do. They're friends, and they hang out in the tavern and they get drunk and stuff like that. That's perfectly adequate as a connection to Gundren. Gundren could be the commanding officer, or was the commanding officer during the great Goblin and Orc wars, and the player's character was under his command. Gundren could have saved the player's characters' lives from a lynch mob for a variety of different reasons, and maybe the player characters are trained with Gundren Rockseeker in the same mining and trade guild. So the guilds often have trading courses and so forth. Maybe he entered the same sort of training as they did. Gundren Rockseeker paid off a few of the player characters' gambling debts, possibly, or Gundren has helped them, or helped the player characters and Gundren have saved a traveling caravan from a bandit attack. Maybe they joined forces to assist them. And then lastly, you could actually run a short adventure with the player characters and Gundren to help cement that connection, because it's really important that they care about Gundren. If they don't care about Gundren, the chances are it just won't work, okay? So those are the 10 things I have as suggestions. And if you're looking for that information, it is a video up on YouTube as well, which is, I think, relatively short. So those are the basic things in terms of introduce the player characters, introduce Gundren Rockseeker, get them to find a connection with Gundren Rockseeker. And then next, you need to ask the players, ask those players, get them to find somebody in the party they have a connection with. They decide what it is, with whom it is, It's fine. This is the sort of stuff you will often do in session 0, even if you're using pre-mated characters. So now the idea is you want the group of player characters to have an existing relationship, so it makes sense that they would be together. They would be adventuring together. Now, as a dungeon master, feel free to suggest ideas if the players are struggling with this sort of thing. Explain why the characters are helping Gundren rockseeker in the first place, okay? Or getting them to come, they've got to come up with a reason themselves. And if you can't get them to come up with a reason, then provide it for them. Because, as I said, adventures aren't driven very well by just following money. And also always allow players to ask questions, because they will ask questions. I'm just going to take a drink. Now, there's a couple of things along here that you wind up doing, and I've got a few little notes for you. Since you notice I'm in this tavern here, I'll have this tavern map. What you could actually do is run a small sort of tavern fight. You could run your own little adventure if you want to, but you could also run a tavern fight. So what would that look like? Ultimately, it's completely up to you. I would suggest you try to keep it to non-lethal, okay? We don't want to wind up anybody getting killed, and we don't want anybody going off to jail, or we don't want it to get too complicated. So a tavern fight, okay? So the idea being that before you start your adventure, you'd put this in place. It's not vital, though. You could have a group of locals or commoners that start an argument with Gundren rockseeker who's possibly drunk or has been drinking. And I would suggest maybe between 4 and 5 commoners would be perfectly fine. In this case, I thought that 4 was probably enough. So I tried to select miniatures here to represent these commoners who are not armed. We don't really want it to be a fight, okay? If you wind up with a fight, then things tend to go haywire really, really fast. Is that just not going to work now? Okay, that's better. Okay, 4, 5. All right. So the idea is you have 4 or 5 commoners who can be part of this interaction, which is basically a bar brawl. It's one of the most common things in Dungeons and Dragons that players like to do, so you might as well get it out of their system in the first place. I would say you probably want to allow your commoners to have a +2 to hit, and the amount of damage they do is just 1 damage. So it's not a lot. +2 to hit, okay, and then damage is just 1. Now, why is it just 1? Well, usually the calculation for unarmed strikes is 1 plus your strength modifier, and commoners have no strength modifier. So you don't have to worry about doing too much maths. So it means every time they hit, they only do 1 point of damage. You could run it as if you're running the unarmed fighting rules. Player characters, if you're wondering how you figure that out for them fighting with just their fists and so forth, it is assumed that all player characters are proficient with unarmed strikes or their fists. Okay? And as I said, they do 1 plus their strength modifier bludgeoning damage every time they strike. So it's very, very easy to do. You'll find that if you just use the existing hit modifier or hit bonus that is on the character sheet for weapons, melee weapons, that is perfectly adequate. You're just not using the actual weapon itself. You want to go through your adventure introduction. There is a small section on here in terms of your adventure introduction. One of the problems with this adventure introduction is it's way too long. So right here, this thing here, if you use this and you read all of this out, you have kind of jumped ahead so far that you might find yourself in a situation where you can't really make it work for the players. The players don't have a say. So adventure introduction, the player characters are going to escort a wagon of mining supplies from Neverwinter to Phandelver for 10 gold pieces and as a favor to Gundren rockseeker. Explain that the money is not the most important part to the player characters, as I've said before. So what I would suggest is you read about half of this. There's a point where it sort of jumps the gun, this particular section. So don't read the whole thing. And I'll be more clear, hopefully, a little bit later. And then you will probably want to introduce Sildar Hallwinter, who is the kind-hearted Griffin cavalry rider that will be escorting Gundren to Phandelver from Neverwinter. And if you want to role play Gundren, Sildar Hallwinter, details you'll find on page 11 of the adventure. I believe you'll find it is partway down around about here. This is all the information you'll need for dealing with Sildar Hallwinter. Now, if it's not here and you wanted more, you can go onto YouTube again, and you will find that I have a video that is on my channel that talks about Sildar Hallwinter in a lot more detail. You can read directly from the text or paraphrase the introduction on page 6. You do not need to memorize anything. You do not need to paraphrase. If you don't want to paraphrase, you can just read it directly. It doesn't matter. It's no reflection on you if you do it that way. But as I said, only read the first paragraph, and then allow the players time to actually ask questions and decide what they're going to do, because they may want to intervene at this point. Gundren Rockseeker could hint at the opportunity to make money or to go into business with him as friendly partners when they get to Phandelver. And I would certainly present that as a possibility to your players. Okay, otherwise it's just money, and we don't want to do that. Sorry, just drink of water. Okay, so Gundren Rockseeker wants to leave with his escort, Sildar Hallwinter. This is the second part of the paragraph, which sort of jumps ahead and sort of doesn't let the players have time to ask any questions or even time to intervene with what Gundren Rockseeker might decide to do. He wants to leave with his escort, Sildar Hallwinter, early to check on his brothers before the wagon is actually ready. The cargo is not going to be ready straight away. So he's going to go early. And he'll have a variety of different reasons why he would do so. So let your player characters convince. But you're still going to have Gundren Rockseeker leave early or in the middle of the night while the player characters are sleeping, and leave a message on the door. You know, he can just leave a message on the door or at the, in the inn. When they leave, they'll find that, where's Gundren Rockseeker gone? No, he's left early, and his concern is around his brothers. You know, they've been left alone for a long time. He's worried about them, and so he's left. It seems like you have circumvented your player character's agency, but if you don't do it this way, it's so hard to get the adventure to work. It's so dependent on Gundren Rockseeker being captured. And if they manage to foil Gundren Rockseeker being captured, then you wind up having to improvise an awful lot of stuff. If the players' characters want to know what is actually in the wagon, and there's a section on that on page 6 under driving the wagon here, okay, you should feel free to add additional information here. So don't think that just this section here is going to be the only thing in the wagon, okay? Yes, you can interrupt, and please type in #question so that I don't miss you. By all means, if you have questions, just ask them. I will keep checking the chat every once in a while to make sure there aren't questions that need to be asked. So yeah, so Chang, by all means, and hopefully I got your name right, please, by all means, just ask those questions. I will get to them. Yep. Right, so the wagon. Now, who's driving the wagon? When they decide to actually leave, who's driving the wagon? You need to get one of the player characters to assign themselves to this. It's kind of like arranging marching order. They might decide one of them is going to drive the wagon and the others will walk behind or beside the wagon as it's traveling along the road. It's actually perfectly fine if all of them just decide to sit on the wagon. My group have done that in the past, and I didn't see that there would be any reason. I mean, is the wagon so full of mining supplies, there's no space for anybody to sit on top? I think it'd be perfectly fine. So if they decide they all want to ride, then let them all ride. Then read directly from the text or paraphrase the introduction on page 6. This is the second half. Okay, you're reading the second half of or the second paragraph of this section, and then again allow your players time to ask questions and decide what to do. You can show them a map. The map that is available is actually reasonable, and I'm going to just pull up the map now so you can see it. I believe it should be that one, but I can't see it. Why can't I see it? Let's make sure I've got it back here. There we go. Now it's provided in the adventure. For those of you who are wondering, this map here. Now, you'll notice on the map, it has Thunder Tree marked on it because it's an old settlement. It has Phandelver marked on it. It has Coneyberry and Old Elwell. And then it's got Icespire Peak and the Mount Hot Now, and then Neverwinter. So there's nothing really wrong with giving them this particular map. I mean, it doesn't give them everything. There's a different map that does give them a lot more. So it would be perfectly fine to show them this map. So don't feel like you can't. Okay. Sorry. My voice is sort of disappearing a little bit on me. We'll keep going. And now, I would suggest to you that you can probably get yourself a map to the player's characters through either Gundren. Gundren Rockseeker could give them the map that leads them there. So that map that I've just shown you, Gundren could give them that map, or they could buy one for probably 1 copper piece in Neverwinter. It seems to be something that players do ask. It's like, can we have a map of the location? And so they just buy one from Neverwinter, or Gundren's got one he can hand to them. You don't need to describe the scene as they travel. Feel free to do so if you want. But if you want to mention anything about the weather and the travel, my suggestion is just look outside your own window and just describe or present the image of what you see out your window to your players. And that's what's going on. So if you've got a sunny day, there's a bit of cloud and the sun's out and it's warm, and that's what you can see outside, describe that. It's the easiest way to get around describing travel. You don't have to do an awful lot. Actually, less is better rather than more. Then read directly from the text or paraphrase the Goblin ambush section. This is right here, this Goblin ambush section on page 6, and allow the players time to ask questions and decide what to do. So to give you an idea of kind of what that would look like, I'm just going to maneuver some of this stuff. Apologies. It's all mostly set up, people. It's just in this situation, I have layers of maps rather than just one map. Now I've selected the King's Road. It's actually a pretty common road. You can find this map in a lot of different locations. The Reincarnated map series has it. If you don't want to worry about that, you can probably even find it as a digital representation on the internet. So if you're wanting to get hold of it without having to buy anything, totally understand. You can get it and just get a digital version of it, because I do have one myself. This is the map here. I'll just move this out of the way. So essentially the scene that you're trying to describe as they are traveling is the fact that there are a couple of dead horses and their wagon is sort of over here somewhere, okay? And they'll be on the wagon probably, or traveling beside it, something like that. So my suggestion to you is do not put anything out until you're ready to run a combat. If you do, they assume almost instantly, particularly when you're dealing with somebody who is experienced, there's got to be a fight. And so you don't want to do that. So don't do it straight away. Don't put out anything until you're absolutely ready. The only reason I'm putting the map out is to sort of give you an idea of what the scene looks like, to make it a bit easier. Players will expect an ambush. It's quite common for players to sort of see this scene and think, well, there's got to be something wrong, and what should I do? I know, I will look for danger. Now, if they're not familiar with the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons, then maybe they won't know that that might involve a perception check or how that all works, but they're probably going to at least say, I want to look for danger. That usually means, okay, we need to start looking at passive perception, which is why we took down those scores in advance, or we're going to get them to make a roll. I think probably the simplest way is also allow your players to ask questions and decide what they're going to do. So they might decide they all get out of the wagon and go and check out the horses. They're quite some way off. That's like 50 meters between them. I just don't have enough space to do that in this situation. So the first thing you want to do is have them, whoever's going to move up to the dead horses, if they want to do it stealthily, they can, but it's impractical because the wagon's slow, it's noisy, and the oxen. So the goblins that are hiding in the bushes either side, they would be aware of them. They're probably not going to be able to escape that. At about 50 feet away, the characters are likely to be able to, aren't likely to be able to see the goblins. So if they stay in the wagon 50 feet away, it won't matter if they use passive perception or an active perception check. I would not, if they want to roll a check and they're in the wagon and they're too far away, then just don't accept it. Just leave it, okay? You can just say you don't notice anything. They need to get much closer. So somebody needs to get out of the wagon and actually, without opening the saddlebags, get close enough to actually potentially see or hear those goblins hiding there. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother. It's the characters that move up close, up to the horses. Now, as soon as they look through the saddlebags and inspect these saddlebags, the hidden goblins, that is when they trigger. This is when they will ambush them. This is renowned, this particular situation, for really causing an awful lot of trouble. Now, for those of you who want to use a map, but you don't want to use this, look, you can just draw your own one. If you've got a whiteboard or a piece of paper or a battle mat that's writable, or you can write and then remove it with water and stuff like that, or a eraser, then by all means use that. You can draw your own. It's not that difficult. It would be a road and a couple of bushes either side. So it's not hugely complicated if you want to do that. Do not put out the goblin miniatures till you're ready to actually make the attacks with them, because as soon as you put the miniatures out, the players will assume that they know the location of those goblins. This is why you shouldn't do that until you're ready. I'm going to sort of just briefly give you an idea of some of the maths behind what's going on with this. So let me just take that and rub this out. I was hoping my black pen would actually work. I've got another one here, so I'll use that now. So you'll notice that goblins have a stealth bonus of 6. And that'll probably be the first thing that you'll need to contend with, is dealing with it. And I'll make sure I get it close enough so you can see what's going on. Okay. So the first thing you want to deal with is deciding on what you're going to do with the stealth checks. You do not need to make a stealth check for every single goblin. There's 4 goblins. Making 4 stealth checks would be laborious. So stealth check. How's it done? Very simple. The modifier is a 6. It's on the character sheet. It's very easy to find. You grab yourself a dice, 20-sided dice, and you roll it. Now, if you decide to use it, apply advantage, you can if you decide that seems appropriate, but you don't need to. And then I get a 4. So if I get a 4, that comes to 10. 10 would be the stealth check for the goblins hiding in the bushes. I then compare that with the passive perception of the characters that are close enough to notice them, using passive perception. This is our list here. The fighter is the only one that's close enough, so they would probably have heard or spotted those goblins because they scored high enough, right? The other characters, no. If I roll it again, that means that this character here is probably the only one who won't be surprised in the first round of combat. And these characters over here will be surprised because they were unaware of what was going on. So if I roll it again and I got a 3, I need a slightly bigger number. Come on, give me another number. I'm re-rolling this for the sake of, what am I re-rolling for? Okay, so we've got a bigger number. You only roll this thing once, by the way, just for the goblins once. Okay, 17. So 17 is greater than. You have to get greater than. You can't get equal to. It has to be greater than. It's a contest. So that means the goblins are not going to be noticed by anybody. I would recommend not using a passive stealth check, which is 10 plus their stealth modifier, because it would be so high, there's probably very little chance the characters will ever detect them. Okay, so it's not a great idea. The other thing is, once we've determined that, then you can start getting people to roll initiative. Now, the idea behind initiative is that once we've determined who's going to go first, we're taking our initiative and we are putting it into order from highest to lowest, right? So we've got our wizard, we've got a fighter, we've got a rogue, and we have a cleric. Now, the modifier for the wizard is a +2. So the +2, you're going to add to a 20-sided dice roll when you decide that there needs to be a rolling of initiative. Okay, so you roll that. So I get a 6. Okay, I rolled a 6. So 6 + 2 = 8. And then when we do the fighter, it's a -1, which is quite low. Hopefully I'm close enough so you can actually see what's going on. So I got a 16. So 16 - 1, 16 - 1 is 15. Please let me know if I'm not putting the board close enough so you can actually see what's going on. Question. Good. Okay, Ian. I will be using fantasy grounds. Yes. Should I show my rolls to the players or keep them secret? That is up to you. There is no ultimate way that you should do it. It's completely up to you. If you want to hide the rolls, then hide the rolls. If you don't want to hide the rolls, then don't hide the rolls. For me, I don't care whether the characters die or not, because I will find a way to make everything move on. So the only time that people generally are worried about showing their dice rolls to the players is because they might get a result that they don't want. If you're not worried about that, then why would you worry? So it's completely up to you. No judgment on that whatsoever. Does that make sense? Okay, right. So back to rolling initiative. I'll keep going. So the rogue is a +3. That's their bonus, and we get a 7. So 7 + 3, equals 10. And then the last one, I'll put this over here. This is getting through. For the cleric is also a -1. So 11 - 1 for their modifier. It's going to come to 10. And then the DM, the actual monsters, the goblins have a +2 to initiative. So we roll for them, and we only roll once. We don't have to roll for every single goblin. That would be tedious. So I get a 12. Okay, so 2 + 12. So there, 12 + 2 = 14. Sorry about the wonkiness. Now that I have those numbers, I need to put it all into order. We can see the fighter got 15, so they should be at the top. Fighter at the top of our initiative, like so. And then after that, we're going to descend down. So 15, 14 is the next one. So the Dungeon Master is going to go next. And then everybody else is pretty much underneath. So the rogue and the cleric. Now, because they're on the same initiative, 10, you just decide amongst the players who wants to go first. If you're using strict order. If you're not using strict order, it won't matter. And the wizard has only got an 8, so they go last. Don't worry about Gundren rockseeker right now. Forget about that. So now we're into order. So that means that normally what you would do is you would just call out whose turn it was, and they would take their turn. And when they finish their turn, you just keep going. And then when you finish that round, when you get to the bottom, go back to the top, and you go into a new round, round 2. Okay? So that's the concept behind dealing with your initiative. Now, surprised player characters don't get to act in the first round. So the first round of combat, they do nothing. I would expect possibly an argument with some of the players about this, particularly if the person or the person playing the character who actually did notice goblins, if they're not surprised, says, I yell out there's goblins, they'll say, oh, well, we're not surprised anymore. Well, mechanically they are, even, just because somebody's called out, there's an ambush, doesn't mean that you aren't surprised. It means that you have communicated that there is a problem, but it's the dice rolls are your ability to move quickly when something dangerous happens. It's your ability to respond quickly, and that's what it's trying to determine here. So certainly expect some sort of argument with your players. Just explain to them that mechanically this is how it works, and they will get to act on the second round if they are surprised. At the end of every player character's turn, they get to use their reaction, but they won't be able to use a bonus action, they won't be able to move, and they won't use their action as normal, okay, until that has actually happened. Now, even when the goblins attack, it's possible for player characters to negotiate a truce with through bribery. Now, this doesn't come up very often, and I see very few people ever talk about this sort of thing, but we will. If there are, even if they don't know where the goblins are, and they are in the bushes somewhere, you can still try to talk to them while they're in the bushes. And you could say, truce, we'll pay you some money, some tribute, a bribe, a toll. Leave that open. I think it would be perfectly fine to allow this, okay? You don't even necessarily have to have them roll a persuasion or a deception or an intimidation check to do the bribery. I mean, for bribery, it's usually going to be deception, or it's going to be persuasion, probably persuasion. And then a few gold coins. The goblins will ask them to leave those gold coins on the road, maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 gold pieces per player character. You leave them on the road, they go away, they stay in the bushes, and when you leave, they take their toll. And then that encounter's done. You didn't even have to actually engage in a fight. Your players could do something like this. For those of you who are wondering, I'm going to have to run a combat. I've heard so many deadly and horrible things about what happens in this adventure. No, it's not necessarily like that at all. Okay, so now that we've got our initiative, I'm going to move this thing over here for now. I don't know that we're necessarily going to use that much now. And I know there's an awful lot of information. If I'm going too fast and I need to explain stuff, let me know. One of the things that I will say about dealing with the goblins is only place the goblins out once they have fired. If they decide to hide again, which they can, and they probably will, then make sure you remove them from the battle mat again, if you're using a battle mat. If you're using Theatre of the Mind, it's going to be a pain in the butt. I would ignore the adventure. It says something about the goblin combat tactics, the instructions on page 7. They're terrible. They're a really silly idea. Have the goblins attacking with the short bows, not half of them attacking with short bows, and then half of them moving out with short swords. Makes no sense. What they would normally do is your goblins would attack. Now the player characters know where they are because they've given away their location by doing so. So you shoot with a bow, and then you move, and because of their nimble escape ability, they can now hide again every single turn they have, which makes goblins incredibly dangerous. Okay, there is a way of getting around this for the player characters, so don't worry. I've seen this work out perfectly fine, so you don't have to freak out. The player characters' attacks, like we're essentially making an attack roll against AC. And I have all the stats here for you if you want them, but we're not going to go over that just yet. I think we'll use that when we start actually playing through. But the most likely thing to occur is that your characters are going to use ranged attacks. It's the smartest way. So if any of the goblins lose hit points, so this is one of the things that I know a lot of people don't do. If any of the goblins, even if they lose 1 hit point, I would have them flee the combat. Literally, I would have them leave. So they are no longer a problem for the group because goblins don't want to die. Okay, they can move through the bushes using the cover and then escape pretty easily. Goblins are pretty sneaky and quick. Okay, and just have them retreat. When you only have 2 goblins remaining in the fight and they are well and truly outnumbered, then I would certainly have them flee. Okay, please advise your players on good combat tactics. So get them to use cover, ducking down in the wagon, using the wagon as cover, getting into the bushes themselves is a good idea, using a readied action. Now, a readied action is taken on somebody else's turn. The only way to really get these goblins is to use a readied action. That means that one of the characters says, I'm going to fire a bolt or an arrow or cast a ranged spell if I see any of the goblins in the bushes. So as soon as they make an attack, a goblin makes a short bow attack, that's when they get to use their readied action on somebody else's turn, on the dungeon master's turn. It is the best strategy. Please suggest it to them. I mean, if you really want to be hard-nosed about it, you don't have to, but I would suggest it to them. And they can also search for the hidden goblins. The problem is it's a whole action to do so, which means they don't get to attack unless they have action surge, which they won't have. at this present time. Now, when the battle's finally over and your characters are dealing with the carnage, either the goblins have all escaped, or maybe some are dead, or some are unconscious, they can potentially interrogate them. And hopefully they don't get too wacky about this sort of thing, but they certainly should be and can interrogate them. So what does that look like? A captive goblin tied up, knock them out. You don't need to use an intimidation check. If you threaten them with death, if all they say, look, if you don't do this, we're going to kill you, the goblin's going to give it up. Goblins are cowardly. You don't have to use a dice roll for all of this. Now, finding the goblin trail. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly in terms of the goblin trail. There's a goblin trail that leads from this location to Cragmore Hideout. It could be found by a trail of blood. I would suggest there is a trail of blood leading from the horses in this location into the thickets, showing that there's a hidden trail that they could follow, and they just follow the trail of blood, and the grass has been pushed down, stuff like that. The adventure talks about using a DC 10 wisdom or survival check. Now, a DC 10 is an easy check, very easy as 5. I wouldn't even bother with that. If they look for something, just let them have it. A DC 10 is a waste of time. It frankly isn't worth the effort. If you want to make the DC high, you can. I would suggest use that blood trail that I just mentioned. It's not stated in the adventure. There is a snare and trap, snare pit, a snare and a pit. So there's a snare trap, which is not designed to hurt you, just slow you down. And then there's a pit trap along the goblin trail, this hidden trail. And it can only be detected by the lead character in the group, in the marching order. So you need to ask them for the marching order. So when they start venturing off, please get them to decide who's in the front, right? Is it the fighter in the front who's going in there, and maybe the rogue, and then the cleric, and the following the trail? It is going to be the character in the front who makes a check to actually notice these things, or you use their passive perception. I think that's the smartest way of dealing with this, is just go with that, okay? Now, what happens if they say, can I make a check, and they get a score lower than their passive perception? Like, say the fighter's a 13, right? And yet, if they make a check, and do we give them an active check? Do we give them just a passive one? That's completely up to you. You decide. You're the dungeon master. Perception. So, the fighter's perception is a +3. And if we're making an active check, we just roll a 20-sided dice. It would be a 5. Here we go. Good example. 8. So they get an 8, and yet their passive perception is 3. Just use the passive perception. The idea is that they can't score below passive perception score. That's the floor for their check. Whenever they make an active check, that's the intention in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, is they can't score below that. I know some dungeon masters like to do this a little bit differently, which is fine, but you don't have to do it that way. I think this is the intention of the designers. That's how I suggest you do it. All the instructions for those snare and pit traps are laid out pretty extensively. Now, when you have to award experience points, if you're using experience points, you're going to be giving out 75 XP or experience points to each player character for finding the hideout, not for defeating the goblins. Although if they don't find or decide to go and find the hideout or follow the blood trail, then just award experience points for defeating the goblins. Goblins don't need to be killed to award them experience points or the benefit of dealing with that situation. If they bribe them with money, if they drive them away, if they enter into some sort of negotiation, if the goblins run away, it's all fine. Still give them the reward, because they've still dealt with that situation. And the very slim and unusual possibility that they actually decide, turn around and go back and sneak around the goblins, which I suppose is possible, you can award them experience points for doing that as well.